we'll get started. Share my screen as well. Cool. So we are at week 5. We're in the last week of class. I don't know about y'all, but I always, or at least this is, every time I teach this class, I'm like, 5 weeks is so long, it's gonna feel like it takes forever. And then we like start at week 1 and then like, feels like next week it's week 5. So I hope you enjoyed this class. We'll talk a little bit about next steps like for folks afterward toward the end of class. And then also I have a survey that I ask all my students to fill out just so, like I can improve class over time. So this was a particularly interesting class because of all the protests happening and just, general coronavirus stuff. So thank you for being with me. And it was definitely an interesting class and probably a challenge for just about everybody. But I'm really happy to see people making stuff and hope you'll continue if you found it enjoyed it. One thing I will note is that I've posted in the Slack a couple times now, and I will post one more time. You're welcome to sign up for a one-on-one with me. There's just a Calendly link. I think Adi already has, but you're welcome to just sign up at any time. It's mostly after work. If there's this particular time you need or that you really want to talk, just let me know, and I can probably make it work. But I just have a bunch of different times available for folks. Those are good. They're like 20 minutes to half an hour. I tend to find they work really well if you come with questions or like, here's what I'm working on. How do I improve this? Or like, what else should I be doing? Otherwise, we just hang out for 20 minutes and like shoot the shit, which is also fine. But like, since it's your time and I know you want to get better at your project, think about what questions you have before coming. And like, you're welcome to sign up for that pretty much any time. Like if a month from now, you're like, okay, I finally have sat down and have a project in mind, like feel free to sign up. I won't ever like be like, hey, like this expired. Like there's no expiration on this. In addition to that, you're always welcome to DM me on Slack. After this class is over, I will probably be a little bit slower and or forget. So if you DM me and like don't hear from me in a couple days, just like re-DM me and be like, hey, I know you're busy. Like I just wanted to put this on your back on your plate or whatever. Yeah, so like always welcome to help. I'm always happy to help out people. I just will definitely forget or like be distracted by other things. So please just bug me. Like, don't feel bad about bugging me. I'm sorry that you will have to bug me, but yeah, just to let you know about that, you will. So yeah, so like that's sort of it for today and then going forward. Today we're gonna look mostly at like doing interpolation videos. So as I mentioned last week, like there are now some new things inside of Runway that allow you to do that. But if you wanna have more control or just wanna try to make some different types of things, I'm gonna walk us just through some demos of different pieces. So we'll look at linear interpolations, we'll look at noise loops, and then I'll demo this project that I worked on with one of my previous students, Naoko, on basically like generate a piece of text and convert that to an image. So I'll show you a demo of that. There'll be like P5.js files for all these, so you don't have to know how to code as long as you can like sort of follow the top lines of things. But if you are interested in coding, you can kind of see how I've broken stuff up, and you can probably do some really crazy cool things beyond just the examples I have. At the end of class, we will look at hosted models. So hosted models is a fairly new feature. It launched probably about a month ago or maybe a little bit longer. And it allows you to basically take one of these projects and like host it on a web page. Runway will basically like keep a server available for you. So someone can visit the page and like trigger it and then like create images. We'll talk a little bit about like the cool part of that, but then also the downside of that is that can get pretty expensive. We'll talk about that. And then lastly, for those of you who are interested in learning more about these materials, going beyond just this class, since it was like a pretty basic and very short class, I'll have a bunch of links to other artists to check out, other video classes, and then some of my own materials going forward. So hopefully it'll be a jam-packed day, but you'll get some cool stuff out of it. Any questions before we get started? All right. So why don't we do this? I was really excited to see some folks posting videos in the Slack channel. So I thought maybe we would just go through a couple of them and people can talk about what they made. Adi, do you want to start? I'm just going to pull up this video really quickly. Do you want to start and just talk a little about what you made here?
Sure. So the data set here is about like 1,500 photographs that are part of this competition Nikon runs. I think it's called like, I forget what it's called, but it's basically like a micro photography competition they've been running since 1975. And so I went to this exhibition about a year ago and I found their website, and it seems like they had all their images going back to 1975. So I basically scraped a bunch of their images and just trained a model on that. And I kind of like this because, you know, the images, like the original images are quite abstract because they're all, you know, photographs with really, really small organisms and stuff. So there's a pretty big variety within the data set, but you can see the specific sort of patterns that are being picked up within the video and even within the images that were generated. And I mean, I like the fact that it's picking up those patterns, but it's also, there's a really big diversity in terms of what you can get with the images. So I generated 50 images, and there are a couple of patterns that, you know, repeat across those 50 images, but there's still a huge amount of diversity in terms of what you're actually seeing. So I have a couple of ideas of what I want to do with this, but we'll see where that goes. I think part of that depends on what we're doing today. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with how this turned out.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's really cool. I agree that like I've seen a couple different folks do this type of data set, and what's interesting is like just depending on how different on where you scrape your data set from, you get different outputs. So it's really cool. You definitely do see some of the details, and if you've seen the data set, you can kind of imagine what these came from, but it's still really interesting. And it's cool that it goes from like texture to like cellular things to other textures. Yeah, it's cool. Thank you for sharing. Joe, I think you had uploaded some stuff too. I'm gonna just bring up your Memphis thing if you want to talk about it.
Yeah, so basically I just through Pinterest, through the Chrome extension, I found a lot of like good quality images of like furniture from like Memphis Group and like other designers are like adjacent to that style. And a lot of them came from like auction houses. So like basically all the basic editing and like the square off was already done for me. So I just like kind of like picked and choose from like that set. And I'm like retraining it again, like more steps, because like it's a pretty small data set still. It's like I think like 500 images and something. So, but it's now like I'm looking at it how it's like going now. It's interesting because it's more like sculptural rather than like actual furniture, even though you can see some tables. They kind of, most of them look, I'm gonna say like weird glass sculptures, but I don't know, it turned out pretty interesting. I kind of like that it almost looks like kind of like weird like watercolor paintings.
Yeah, definitely. And what's cool about it is like the Memphis style still kind of comes through in the colors, right? Like you get those like bright oranges and cyans and stuff. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what happens when you train this a little bit longer. It'd be pretty cool. So do you want to talk about this other model you're working on too? Here, I can pull up the video for this one. I think it's already here. Yeah.
Yeah, so the data set for this one is actually like really, really small. So it was more of like an experiment that I wanted to see because the artist has a very specific style and like almost like structural. He uses a lot of circles and has like sometimes like words and a lot of information in his paintings. So I was just kind of curious to see how it would react to having like a really small data set with like a specific style, but like very different like colors too. And I'm actually quite surprised about how it turned out. Like, even though it's like super undertrained because like my computer shut off in the middle, it's, you can still see like a lot of like the structural elements, especially like here, it almost looks like a door, like a wooden frame. So I'm really interested in seeing how it's gonna keep evolving.
Yeah, it's cool. I was saying before class that I was looking up who this artist was, and well, let me see if is it here? It is here. So you can sort of see the artist's work, and yeah, it's like you do get those very hard grids every now and then some of the circles are showing up. So it's pretty cool. And the colors. I mean, the thing is, it always picks up the colors well, so that's like almost a giveaway for some of these things. But it's really cool. Thanks for sharing. If anyone has stuff that they also want to share, like you can feel free to upload it on the Slack at any point, and we can maybe after break we'll also like look at some stuff. there's a couple of things that I can sort of show based on some of the stuff I've seen here too, and we can look at things and see how they differ or whatnot. So really cool. Thank you for sharing. And I'll say, like, please feel free to keep sharing in the class channel. There's also on in the Slack room, there's also a share projects channel where people tend to share projects they've worked on. So you're always welcome to share stuff there as well. Everyone sort of like likes to see what everyone else is working on, because it's always sort of fun to see. And especially with StyleGAN, it's like guess what it was trained on, which is kind of a fun game. I feel like you could turn that into a website too. It'd be pretty cool. All right, awesome. A couple other things that I want to talk about today is actually, like, Judson isn't here, but there was a lot of talk this weekend about this model called Pulse, which I don't know if anyone saw the chatter about this. That is not going to work as a Google term. Let me try and see if I can find some of my Twitter pieces about it. What was really interesting, and Judson mentioned this to me, is that last week we talked a little bit about data sets and like started talking a little bit about like how they do or do not work. I'm gonna find Mario Klingman, because I think he talked a lot about this. Yeah, so there was this really interesting, you probably saw this tweet about this, which is, so this model, basically there's a Colab file. We'll talk a little bit about Colab tonight, but basically there's a way for you to upload really low res images into this Google file, and then it will output what it thinks is the high res image. And this took off because people were putting in pictures of Obama and getting a white person out, right? And like, we talked about this a little bit, like, so it turned out what they trained this on was Celeb A, which was that data set I talked about last week or the week before. And it was like, it's kind of well known because it's mostly celebrity photos and mostly white celebrities, right? So people were kind of raising hell over this model last week or this weekend because it clearly was trained on a lot of white people, right? So Obama should not be a white person in this model. But this is an example of where, based on the data set it trained on, it started to learn sort of ethically questionable results, right? So Judson and I were just talking this weekend about how this is like a perfect match to what we were talking about this week, right? Which is like, your data set matters a lot in your training. And choosing the right data set, especially when it comes to ethnicity and faces, is like really, really important. And there was just a ton of like backlash against this model. What I also thought was interesting is Mario, who is like a very well-known artist within this field, also sort of took a look at how the thing was constructed, and he was actually able to get better results, right? So like, this is again a question of like, is it the data set is trained on is wrong? Is it the algorithm that's incorrect? Is it just the default assumptions of the engineering folks who write the code for these things? There's a ton of sort of interesting ethical questions. And I haven't really touched on this in this class because generally everyone finds artistic, cool data sets to play with. But my like rule of thumb is generally don't work on faces. Like, you just don't want to do it. It like gets you into like all sorts of like problematic areas. I personally try to avoid working with face data as much as possible unless I'm doing something really abstract with it. Because there's just like so many potential surveillance problems there. Like, a lot of the feedback here was like, what if police start to use these models? And they already are. Like, there are better models than this that the police are already using to do face detection. And actually today I just retweeted, which I'll post a link to it in our Slack channel. I retweeted an article where cops arrested the wrong person because they were using some of these face detection methods and it gave them a false positive. So like, even though we're working in these fields and we're thinking like, oh, we're just gonna make some fun data sets, there are people who are using similar technologies for what I would say is fucked up purposes, right? So like, we as artists should probably think about that when we're doing our own work. We don't want to inspire people to do bad with things. But also like I said, like, avoid faces. You don't want to get into those battles. It is pretty nasty. But I thought this was really interesting because it highlighted a lot of stuff that we're talking about in this class. And Judson, who couldn't make it today, was also like, we learned about that last week. That's awesome. So, it's interesting how relevant even some of the tidbits that come up in this class will be to things like this. And obviously people are very concerned about what police and other government agencies are doing with these sort of models on their own. So I thought it was cool, interesting. I'll post a little link to some of the feedback on this, but I thought it was pretty cool. Cool, so I'm going to just jump right in unless there's other questions. We'll jump into this week's lectures. All right, cool. All All right, so interpolation. So we've talked about this a couple of times in class already, but I'll just go over like quick high level, like how this works again. So remember that StyleGAN in particular uses latent spaces, and StyleGAN's latent space uses 512 dimensions. Again, that's like 3 dimensions, but way more. There's no real way for us to think about this otherwise. So again, in Runway, like that latent space can sometimes be compressed down into flat areas for things like, you know, just like using this vector grid or whatever it is. But we've also talked about how if you imagine this latent space in 2 dimensions and you have a point in space and you want to move to another point in space, that generates a video, right? And that generates what we call interpolations. So we're moving from this person to this person. And if you do it in very, very small increments, you will get interpolation. So how does this work? If we visualize this, we're essentially moving from one point, one vector point in space to another vector point in space, to another vector point in space, to another vector point in space, to another vector point in space. Now, the way Runway's sort of default latent space animations is it picks random points, right? It says it picks a point here, it picks a point here, and it just animates between them. We're going to look at some methods that allow for a little bit more control of that. And when you see something I'm calling seed here, that actually is just a vector position. So you might hear me referred to as a seed as like a placeholder for a 512 dimensional array. But what's important to sort of understand in the way that you are using control of these tweening points is that if you start in one place, right? So let's say we start in a vector, we move to another, we move to another, we move to another, we move to another, and then we come back to that same vector, you create a loop, right? Because at every one of these points is the exact same image. So if I'm always looking at this particular point, whatever that stands for in the 512 dimensional array, it's always going to reproduce the exact same image. So that's how we end up doing looping, right? We just say like, let's go back to that last vector. Another thing that's really important to understand in these is that because you can't really visualize these spatially, you will sometimes produce a video and you'll think, man, it feels like it's moving really fast at this point and then it's moving really slow in this other point. What's going on here? And that can be because if you're picking a point that is really close to each other, but you have the same amount of frames, that'll feel really slow, right? Because it's moving very, 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 very tiny amounts of space between those. Whereas if you have a vector that's very far apart from another and you're animating between these and you're doing basically because we have the same number of frames between each one of these points, this will feel very fast because it's jumping very quickly. There's not really an easy way to control this, right? So when I've like taught this to motion graphics students, they're always like, how can I make it feel perfectly seamless? And it's really hard to do because we can't really visualize 512 dimensions in space. Like there's no way to say like, these two are close to each other, these two are close to each other. There might be ways to do it where you could say like, let me try to like create even amounts between these, but it's still really hard. So you will just get videos that will always feel a little like sort of like, I describe it as like herky jerky. Sometimes it'll feel like really fast, sometimes it'll feel really slow. What I've seen some people do is they'll bring those videos into After Effects and then do like the time warping effect. So they can like sort of like shrink or speed up certain parts. That's one way to sort of get slightly smoother, but it's still an art rather than a science. So we're going to look at stuff today that is going to use what we call P5.js. So P5.js is a program that basically allows us to write some JavaScript. If you're familiar with processing, this is a JavaScript version of processing. And P5.js just allows us to write some code we'll be doing it in the browser. And that code will talk to a runway model. And then our runway model will be able to, basically we'll use the code to generate our dimensional vectors. And then we will talk to Runway and say, hey, I want a vector at this point. I want a vector, or sorry, I want an image at this vector. I want an image at this vector. I want an image at this vector. So this will allow us to have more control over our images. Because right now, in terms of Runway's interface, you've got the vector grid, and then you've got their default animations that are randomized. So this will give us a little bit more control. So a couple things to note about what we're going to do here. So the process for this, essentially, we're going to start our model in Runway. Our model in this example always has to be on in Runway. So basically, we're going to talk over the local network. So my computer is going to talk to my Runway app over basically the network inside the computer. So we need to have our Runway model on while we're doing this. We're then going to open up the P5 JavaScript files in Firefox. Right now, there's a bug inside of the Chrome version. So for now, we have to do it in Firefox. If you're not a Firefox person, I'm sorry, but it's just going to work a little bit easier for us for now. And there's each of these files, I have a couple of variables. And the variables you'll sort of see here, it's like truncation value, which we all know what that means now. Frame count per transition, so that means how many frames between each vector. Whether we want it to loop, and then we will be turning on download images. Long story short, but this used to be easier inside of Runway, and now it's a little bit harder for various reasons. But basically, we're going to download every frame to our desktop, and then we're going to convert that into a video. So we'll basically like run the script, and we'll download all the images, and then we're going to put those images in a folder, and then we'll use a command line function to turn those into video. If you're an After Effects person, you could also take all those and like add them to like an image sequence inside of After Effects, or you could probably do it in Photoshop, but you don't want to open that many images at once because some of these can be pretty long depending on how long you want the video to be. So we'll just sort of look at this. I'm going to quickly demo like how to do this based on using Runway and this script. The scripts are linked to in the deck here, which I will provide to everyone after class. So I would say for now, just sort of follow along and then maybe try it yourself with your own model after class. And if you have any questions, I can help with it. So as I mentioned, you do want to use this in Firefox. One thing to note about Firefox is there's settings inside of here. You want to make sure that you switch from always ask where to save files to always save your files. You can save them to whatever folder you want. The reason for this is that we're going to like sort of programmatically save like possibly thousands of files. And if you set this to always ask, you'll have to approve every location. And you'll want to die. It's very, very frustrating. So make sure you do this before running this script because it will turn into a huge headache otherwise. And then once we're there, I'll walk through the ffmpeg command. But this is set up if you're ready, if you want to use ffmpeg. Basically, ffmpeg is like this crazy dark art of creating videos through terminal. Basically, this is the command you want to use. If you use this command, it'll always work, and that's probably like all I want to say about it. And I'll show you how to use it in terminal. But if you know about ffmpeg, you know you can do lots of other stuff with this that might be really interesting for you. Cool, so let's jump to Runway and take a look. So I'm gonna use my favorite model at the moment, which is obviously the Bone model. So we're gonna take a look at how to set this up with P5. So the first thing you wanna do is you wanna go to the model and then you're gonna add it to workspace. So I'll call this Bone P5. So the first thing you want to do in this example is, so in this example, we're going to do what's called linear interpolation, which means we're going to go from one point to another point to another point. So I want to control these points, right? Because if I just want random points, I could just use Runway's built-in latent spacewalk. But in this case, I want to generate my own. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run my model. I'm going to wait until we get some vectors here produced in the vector grid interface. And while this sets up, I'm going to change my truncation values a little bit. 5, that seems good. So this particular version will give you a little bit more control. You'll be able to say, I want to start at this point, I want to move to this image, and then I want to move to this image, and I want to move to this image. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick some images from our vector grid here. We're going to download the vectors themselves. We're going to open them in a code editor. I generally recommend something like Sublime Text. It's very straightforward and it's free. So you can sort of just figure out what you want to do from there. Hopefully none of this is that, if this is the first time dealing with like opening code in a code editor or whatever, it might be a little challenging, but I promise you it's like fairly straightforward if you just follow these steps. So the first thing in here, let's just grab a couple Bone images. So I like this one. So the way to get a vector directly out of Runway, and I think I mentioned this before, but just to repeat, is you click on the grid image here, and then you're gonna press over here in the corner, there's a button that's called Save Vector. You're gonna hit Download. It's gonna save it to a certain location on your desktop. And if you click that very quickly, it'll give you what's this JSON file. And this JSON file, you do not need to read it. Don't worry about what's going on inside of it. The thing is, you wanna open it inside of a code editor, so I'm gonna open it in Sublime Text. It is a very, very long sequence of numbers. Doesn't matter what's actually in there. All I'm gonna do is hit Command All, or like select all and then copy. And then I'm gonna come over to this P5.js file. So in P5.js, I'll provide all the links to this if you need it. We're just gonna open up this file. You'll see in here, so this is the P5.js file. So at the top here are some variables you're going to set. So we're going to set truncation value. I think all these are 0.5. Frame count per transition. Because this is a demo and I don't want this to take hours, I'm just going to set this to be really small. So let's set it to be 10. Actually, let's do 20. And then I'm going to set it to loop. And I'm going to set download images to true. This is because I want to download all those images to my desktop. Height and width, for most of you, it will be 1024. So if you have a different size model, you might want to set these sizes differently. And then here are the vectors. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here, and the first thing you want to do is don't delete this bracket, but delete everything else between these two brackets. And it's a lot of text. So you're just going to come through here, scroll through, hit shift and delete. So basically, once I've deleted everything, I should have just an open bracket and a closed square bracket. That's all I want. So now I've got that vector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command V. So I'm just going to paste that in, and then hit comma. So basically, all you need to do is have a comma separated list of vectors. So this is my first vector. I'm going to come back to Runway. I'm going to grab another image of bone. Let's grab this interesting bone in kind of grass. I'm going to download this vector. Grab this one again. So I'm going to open this inside of Sublime Text. I'm going to select all that text, and then I'm going to come back to my Firefox, and I'm going to go after this comma. I'm just going to hit paste. I'm going to hit comma again. So I'm just going to do, let's do like 3 of these. Obviously, you get really, really complicated with this if you wanted to. But for me, I'm just going to do a couple of these so this demo doesn't take forever. Let's find another good picture of bone here. So what's nice about this is I can avoid all these weird images, right? And I can just transition just from good bone to good bone, and sort of skip all these other images. Let's try this one. This one's nice. It's got like a little grassy background. So I'm going to do this once again. This is a little tedious, but you do get better control over your images, which is nice for things like this. Copy this one, and then I'll paste this one in. So pasted this in. So now I've got 3 vectors in here, and I know that because I've set the truncation value here and the truncation value in my P5.js file, right, are both 0.5, I will get the exact same image because it's always using the same vectors. And then what I've set here is just, you know, how many frames per transition. For those of you not really video familiar or whatever, frames per second is what you want to think about. So I actually set this to 24. That means I'm going to run my video at 12 frames per second. So that'll mean I get 2 seconds between every image, between all those points, right? So it'll be a 6-second long video. Or I guess it'll be an 8-second long video because it's going to loop backwards, right? So for here, I set loop to true, which means I didn't need to add in this first vector again. If you don't want your videos to loop, you can set this to false, and it won't loop. It'll just be a continuous line. So here, let's loop. I'm actually going to set download images to false for now. The reason I'm going to do that is I just want to look at this and see what it's going to produce. Now, if you're interested, if you're a little bit more technically minded, interested in what's going on here, behind the scenes, there is a local host address. So this is just inside of your computer network. P5 is requesting from this address, this HTTP server that already sits on your computer, and is asking Runway to, hey, give me the image at this point. So let's run this without downloading it, and let's just watch and see what happens. So we're just going to come over here. We're going to hit stop, and then we're going to hit play. The play button up here will just start the script. Oop, OK. First mistake. This needs to be true or false. So we're going to set that to true. So now we're going to run this. OK. Well, what's going on here? Let's see. I think this should work just fine. Couldn't load something. What is it trying to load? Let me take a look here real quick. Interesting. What's going on there? I will update these files to make sure this works. This worked earlier for me today. OK. There we go. All right. So now this is slower than what I want for the actual video, right? And that's because it takes a little bit longer to request an image, right? So there's no real-time capabilities within StyleGang. It takes a little bit longer to produce an image than it would be just looping. So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to download each image as it gets produced. And then we're going to sort of behind the scenes, we'll turn that into a video. So this is what I know the animation is going to look like. If it does everything the way I want it to, which it looks like it's fine right now, then I can sort of download those images, right? So sometimes it's a little bit better just to like play it without downloading it, just so you're not downloading a bunch of crap you don't want. And then when it's ready to go, like just set download to be true, and then that'll be able to work. We're going to come back over here to sketch.js. Cool. So I'm pretty comfortable with this. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop on this. And then we're going to, so when you hit stop, it's just going to clear out your section. I do not think P5 is really set up for Firefox, whatever. Okay, so this has now been saved or like ready to go here. So now I'm going to switch download images to true. And this is going to save it into my downloads folder. I apologize, my downloads folder is a horror show, but I'll show you how this is going to work once we get there. So this is going to produce what, like 24 times 4? This is going to produce 96 images, so it won't take that long, but it will, like, they will be downloaded in sequence. So we're going to hit play here again. And as you'll see, my downloads folder is starting to fill up. If I go to my downloads folder, these are all being downloaded. Oh, that's interesting. All right, I'll deal with this in a second. Because I already did this, I now have multiple step files, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. I definitely recommend, I'll show you sort of the process that I recommend to clean this up, but if you're on a Mac, there's also some ways to clean this up. So these are all downloading. I often will produce like minute-long videos using this, and that'll produce like 14,000 files. Which just means you have to like sort of keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't break. I definitely recommend starting with like shorter videos just to get used to it. I have tried to do like 5-minute long videos, and I tend to find that the P5.js will like crash on me at some point. And once it crashes, it can get really annoying to fix. So start with shorter videos, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe a minute, until you sort of have like gotten accustomed to the process. So we're almost done here. Oh, I guess we are done. It did 72 frames. Yep, so that's right. So you'll see in the console here, it'll tell you how many frames. I don't know why my math is wrong. Maybe it didn't loop. Well, we'll look at that. Okay, we'll figure it out. Or maybe I'm just bad at math today, which is totally possible. So it'll generate all 72 images of this. So at this point, I'm gonna hit stop. And then I can also go over to Runway, and I can hit stop on my model. So again, remember that it does cost 5 cents a minute while this is running. So if you were running like a minute-long video and it takes an hour, you will be charged for that time that this is running. So just be aware of that, because it does cost money to generate these videos. So once this is done here, the next thing I recommend doing is just taking all of these images and just moving them all into a folder. So in Mac, there's a really simple way. You select all the images, you say new folder with selection. And I'm just going to call this, we're going to call this bone linear. So once these are inside the folder, that's like really easy. Another cool trick is because all these are coming in sort of unedited, or like the names are weird. Another thing that's really simple to do is, what is it? It's rename 73 items. So you can just rename these with replace text. And you can say find this weird one and then just replace with nothing. So this is using like Automator or whatever. This is just a nice simple way for me to clean this up. So it should all be cleaned up now with step 0 through step 72. Yep, perfect. Okay, so I now have these all in a folder. Now what you'll see here is the sequence is pretty straightforward, right? It goes 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 2. So you could bring this into After Effects, and I think it would auto sequence this layer. So you could also just, if you're not an ffmpeg person, you can take it into After Effects and produce a video very easily with that. Probably with like Adobe Premiere or other video editing stuff. It'd be pretty straightforward to do that. For me, I'm going to show you the trick of using ffmpeg. So with ffmpeg, you do need to have a terminal open. You do need to have ffmpeg installed. I will link to some instructions on how to install it. It's usually like a 1 or 2 line command to get that set up. But ffmpeg is like a power user tool. Like lots of people in the developer community use it. I have already pasted in exactly what you need to run. So you're going to run this command. Now the one thing you'll have to change here is, so this is the command. So this says run ffmpeg, run 24 frames per second. And my input images, so you'll see this is step. So that matches this folder, these naming conventions, right? So it's step, and then it's a 4-digit number, and then .png. So that's all this is saying. It's saying find step, and then find a 4-digit number, and then use PNG. Now, the thing you're gonna have to change here is you're gonna have to change where your folder is located. So what you're gonna wanna do is just come back here and click on your folder name, and then hit Command C or copy, and then just paste in that folder name. So this just says like, this folder lives here. And then it's going to, actually there's 2 ways you can do this. I'll do both ways just so you can see. One is just to point this at the folder you wanna use. So just saying in this folder are a bunch of images that match this convention. And then I wanna create a video using some codecs. You don't need to worry about this stuff, but I just wanna call it, here, let's go to the end. Let's call it bone-bone-linear. So it's just saying, okay, find those files and then turn them into a video that is named bone-bone-linear.mp4. So I'm gonna hit enter. It's gonna give you some crazy looking code that you don't need to worry about, and it's gonna stop. So one thing to note is that I'm currently inside of my home folder. So this is gonna generate that video in your home folder. So I'm gonna come here to my home folder, and bone-bone-linear is here. And when I open it, here we go. So this is the video. And it is pretty short, but I was able to control all those points, right? So there's a second way you can do this, which is probably what I would actually recommend going forward, which is in here, you can actually just say, I wanna move to this folder. So I wanna move inside of that bone-bone-linear folder. And then from there, you can just hit up and you're gonna say like, now that I'm in that folder, I don't actually need to tell you what folder to go to. I can just say in this folder, run this command. So cd just says change directory. So then you give it the directory you want to move to. And then you run this command without that folder, and you hit return again. Now this time, instead of it saving to your home folder, it is going to save to that folder where your downloads were. So if I come back here, and I go to my downloads, and I go inside of bone-bone-linear, you'll see at the top here, this is where they produced the video. So this is probably cleaner because it saves everything into the same folder. But that's it. So again, there's many different ways you can control this, right? So if we go back to our P5.js script, you could add more frames between each image. That would make it pretty much go slower, right? So if you have 60 frames between each of those images, it's gonna go very slow between those. You could add more vectors, right? So you could have 20 different vector points. And you could then say like between each one of these points, do something a little bit different. There's all sorts of different things. You could stop it from looping. You could change your truncation value. So this is pretty, I hope for folks who are not really code familiar, this is fairly straightforward. If you are interested in the code, all the code for this is below here. So there's a bunch of just, I'm like not the world's best JavaScript person, but there's some JavaScript code down there that you can read if you're interested in sort of like understanding how it works and you want to tweak stuff. So I'll share this file after class. You're free to use it. We'll be using P5.js a little bit more in this class today. Any questions about this particular process? Cool. Okay, let me show you one more version and then we'll take a little bit of a break. So that was linear interpolation. Now, linear interpolation is, of course, remember, choosing our points, right? So we're going from one point to another point to another point. The next demo I'm going to show you is what I call a noise loop. And it sounds kind of like what you would expect, right? It's like we're basically going to start at one point, and then we're going to do some like crazy, like sort of like moving around, like a very noisy loop. And we're going to end up back where we started. So this is a little bit different in that we don't really control any of the points it's going to move to. But what's nice about this is you can get a very diverse set of images, right? So if you, oftentimes what I'll do is like when I first make a model, I'll run this code on my model just to sort of see all the different types of images it produces. And these are also tend to be like good demo videos, right? Because you can make these like pretty short and it would show you a lot of images. You can make it very long. And this is like kind of like, it's automated. And I also find that the the videos themselves tend to be a little bit smoother than linear interpolations. So the videos that you may have downloaded from Runway can sometimes be a little that herky-jerky motion. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow. These tend to feel a little bit smoother. They're not perfect, but they tend to feel a little bit smoother. So as I mentioned, this is like, it moves in a random place. It uses this thing called simplex noise, which if you're familiar with noise and using images, this will make sense to you. And it does end up back where it begins. So this always loops. This will always loop for you. As I mentioned, it's a little bit more fluid. It's a little bit more seamless in terms of transitions. But the downside is you have a limited number of controls. So we'll look at the P5.js code for this, and I'll explain a little bit. But there's a parameter called diameter. And diameter is essentially like, if you imagine this were actually a circle, it's actually like how wide of a range should it be versus how small of a range. So if your diameter is really small, it might start in like one little space and just move like to be a tiny little circle. If you make your diameter big, it's going to take up more of the space and probably show more diverse images. So that plus number of frames, right? How many frames am I producing in total? Those two will sort of tell you the speed of your animation. So if you have a lot of frames and a small diameter, it's going to feel slow. If you have a small number of frames and a high diameter, it's going to feel really fast. That makes sense, right? Cool. All right, so let me show you this one. So this is also in P5. So in this case, I'm going to go back to the model here, and there's another file here called noise loop. So in this case, the variables, you don't need to give it any vectors. So if you like did not like the copying pasting huge text of vectors, this will be a little bit easier for you. So here again, there is a truncation value. So you could set it to 0.5, you could put 0.7, whatever you want to do here. There's a frame count. So this is how many frames do I want to produce? So I usually think about this in how many frames per second. So I'm going to generate a 24 frame per second video. And how many seconds do I want to do? So you can do math in this, it's fine. You could also just say I want to produce 480 frames. Either one works. I just like to think about it like this because then I just will change this to be like, I want a 10-second video, I want a 5-second video. So let's set it to 5. The diameter. So diameter isn't really like, there's no real way to like logically think about diameter. It's just like play with it. Set it to 0.5, set it to 10, set it to whatever, and just sort of see how it feels. Also, your model will be different. So like in some models, one will feel very big, and in other models, one will feel very small, just based on how it trained. So you definitely have to just play with this. Again, height and width, and then download images. We'll set this to false for now. And then random seed. This might not actually work. I played with it last night and it was supposed to work, but it doesn't. Ideally, this should tell you like, if you always set it to 1, you should always get the same loop. So if you set it to 1 or then you set it to 10, you should get different videos. I'm not sure it's working the way I expect it to. I'll have to play with that code a little bit. But I would say in general, this is like pretty random. So like you might not know what you're going to get out of it. So if you really like a video, you're kind of stuck with it. You might not be able to reproduce it. So just be aware of that. We'll see. I'll leave this in there and see if it works. So these are the things you want to edit. Again, all the code for it is below here. This is actually based on some code that Dan Schiffman wrote for one of his coding train videos. If you've ever seen those, they're really great. So I just want to give him a shout out because a lot of this code came from him here. So same process for this. We have our P5.js file. What we need to do over here is we need to set up our model and we need to get it running. And I think for this demo, I'll show you the difference between small diameter and large diameter, just to sort of show you how different it can be. So we'll set this to be something pretty small for the moment. Let's set it to 0.5. Also because I'm only producing like 100 frames, I want to keep it pretty small. So actually, maybe I'll go even smaller. Let's do 0.2. All right, this is up and running now. So now because I'm not downloading images yet, I'm going to set this to false. So I'm going to come here and hit play. So again, this isn't real time, but I can kind of sort of see what's going on, right? So you'll see, because I set the diameter slow, it's not making a lot of big motion between each frame, right? It's just sort of like very slowly animating between things. Okay, so this seems good enough for me because I don't want to have demos take forever. I'm going to set this to true. One thing I'm also going to do before I forget is I'm going to go into my downloads and I'm going to delete these other step files so I don't have to do that rename thing. Cool. All right, so let's come over here and let's hit play. And I've got download set to true, so now my images will download. It'll download like what, 120 images? Yeah, so you'll see RandomC didn't work because it should give me the exact same images I had before. I'll try to figure out why that is. I'll figure out later. And so once again, if we look over here, we're downloading our images. You can sort of do like an animation by just like quickly clicking through them. So this one's going to be pretty slow because I set that diameter to be really small. So we'll sort of see what happens when this actually finishes animating. What do we got here? 42. Okay, it's about halfway through. While this loads, any questions about this? All right, halfway there. Okay, we're done. So really quickly, I'm just gonna grab these and put them in a new folder. For me personally, one thing I like to do is I like to name my folders so that I sort of remember what the features, what variables I used. So let's just come in here and let's name this. So this is bone bone. So the diameter for this was 0.2. So I usually say 0.2D just to remind myself. And then it's what? It's 120 frames. So that way I just remember sort of like what my settings were in case I want to come back and try to redo that speed. So let's actually go ahead and make the next video really quickly, and then I can generate both of them using ffmpeg really quickly. So let's do the same frame rate because that didn't take forever. But let's use the diameter of it to be 2. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to hit play. You'll see this is taking much bigger jumps already, right? Because of that higher diameter. Big bone bone. This one also feels like it's generating stuff faster. I don't know. I like sometimes like fake myself out and think that this is faster, this is slower, but I don't know. Who knows? It could just be my internet is faster all of a sudden. No, Joe asked about the semicolon. It shouldn't because it's JavaScript. JavaScript is like a terrible language and that doesn't really like force you into anything, but we'll try this and see. I don't know. Almost finished here. Actually, while that does it, I'll get us set up here for this next line. So while we're downloading this one, I'm just gonna actually, ooh, if I can, let's see. Nope, went too fast. All right, we're just gonna wait. Okay, so now this is done. So I'm gonna stop P5. I'm also gonna come over to Runway and I hit stop. So we've got 2 different videos from 2 different diameters. What's going on here? All right. Why is this working? Of course, now I can't get to the Finder. So weird. There we go. All right. So we'll come down here, we'll grab all these images and we'll stick them in a folder. We'll name this bone dash 2.0 diameter and 120 frames. Cool. So now we've got both our folders here. So I'm just going to quickly run through this and generate my videos. So we'll start with this folder. So we'll CD into that folder. We'll press up. Pressing up just brings back that those commands. So we'll do bone 0.2D and we'll run this. And then we're going to change our directory again, and we're going to do 2.0. I'll press up again, and this one is going to be 2.0D. And let's open both these videos. So we'll open this one. That one up in QuickTime. And open this one up in QuickTime. So there's no way I can press play on both these at the same time, but we'll do our best to get close. We'll put them side by side. So on the left here is the slow one. This is going to be 0.2, and on the right is the fast one. So we'll hit play there. We'll hit play here. So that shows you sort of like small diameter equals slow, large diameter equals fast, right? And what's nice about this is you get a little bit more of an idea of what's available in this data set, or in this model, I guess. Like I might actually set, like I might do this for like 30 seconds, and I do a 30-second video with like a 10 diameter, because that'll give me a lot of different images. So you can play with these. This is kind of like a fun one to play with, in that you don't need to go in and hand pick out each vector. But it's a nice little way to generate some fun looping videos. And these will loop. We can figure that out by just setting loop on this, and then we'll hit loop. So they're cool for Instagram, because then Instagram will also loop them. So here we go. That's Bone. And we are right on time. Amazing. This is like the first time I'm ever going to be right on time. So let's take a 5-minute break. If you have any questions for me, let's save them for after break. But let's come back at 5 after. So it'll be a 6-minute break, 5.5, whatever. So I'll see everyone in 5 minutes.